The windmills failed like the silly fashion accessories they are, and people in Texas died.
A massive winter storm has hit Texas, leaving millions in the state without power. So, of course, Fox News blames wind energy. Yes, wind energy is to blame for millions in Texas without power. Not the fault of the climate crisis leading to extreme weather like this. Not the fault of the failure of the fossil fuel infrastructure in the state, which I will get to. No, wind turbines are to blame. Now, I'm going to get to why this is ridiculous, including looking at a country like Canada that has wind turbines that don't fail like this. But before I get there, here's several clips of Fox News blaming wind power for the power outages in Texas.
Look, everyone would like clean energy, but the fact is that the fossil fuels are far more reliable, and we have a hardened infrastructure to use them.
Texas is an oil and gas state, famously. Running out of energy in Texas is like starving to death at the grocery store. You can only do it on purpose. And Texas did. Rather than celebrate and benefit from their state's vast natural resources, politicians took the fashionable route and became recklessly reliant on so-called alternative energy, meaning windmills.
It seems that the goal is to have the fossil fuels marginalized, the ones that are reliable, and have more of the dependence on, say, wind turbines. And we see how that works out.
So it was all working great until the day it got cold outside. The windmills failed like the silly fashion accessories they are, and people in Texas died.
We need things to be reliable. And reliability, so far, the renewables cannot match the old fossil fuels in terms of reliability.
All right. Once I get to the facts, you're going to laugh at just how dishonest they are. But first, before I get to the issue of how much wind turbines are to blame here, or the reliability of wind turbines, I just got to address the idea that you have here a perfect example of how climate change leads to extreme weather in a state like Texas. And instead of maybe at least acknowledging that in the conversation, they instead blame green energy for what is happening right now in Texas. Green energy, the very thing that is trying to prevent this sort of extreme weather due to climate change. Anyways, let me first start by referencing here some experts, because I don't know anything about this. These people on television don't know anything about this, but the difference between me and them is that I actually reference people that know what they're talking about. While ice has forced some turbines to shut down just as a brutal cold wave drives record electricity demand, that's been the least significant factor in the blackouts, according to Dan Woodfin, a senior director for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which operates the state's power grid. The main factors, frozen instruments at natural gas, coal, and even nuclear facilities, as well as limited supplies of natural gas, he said. Quote, natural gas pressure, in particular, is one reason power is coming back slower than expected Tuesday, added Woodfin. Quote, we've had some issues with pretty much every kind of generating capacity in the course of this multi-day event, he said. Now, if you go back and watch the full segments from Fox News or any other segment where they're discussing this issue, they do not bring up the failure of the fossil fuel infrastructure in the power grid. They only bring up wind turbines that have failed in these storms. They have not brought up the failure of natural gas or the failure of nuclear facilities or coal. They put it squarely on wind turbines, which is even more ridiculous when you look at how small of a percentage wind turbines make up when it comes to energy right now in Texas. Wind shutdowns accounted for 3.6 to 4.5 gigawatts, or less than 13% of the 30 to 35 gigawatts of total outages, according to Woodfin. That's in part because wind only comprises 25% of the state's energy mix this time of year. While wind can sometimes produce as much as 60% of total electricity in Texas, the resource tends to ebb in the winter, so the grid operator typically assumes that the turbines will generate only about 19% to 43% of their maximum output. Even so, wind generation has actually exceeded the grid operator's daily forecast through the weekend. Solar power has been slightly below forecast Monday. So, wind energy only makes up about 25% of the state's energy mix during the winter, and less than 13% of the total of outages. how can you possibly blame wind turbines for the outages in Texas unless you're being completely dishonest? Now, there's also a larger issue at play here. The grid is simply not prepared for weather like this. The situation raises questions about the grid's preparedness. Quote, "Grid demand is so much higher than we've really built the system for in the wintertime," said Joshua Rhodes, a research associate at the University of Texas at Austin. So this part, I think, is obvious once you realize it. Texas is not prepared for this kind of weather, meaning, people right now, they need the heat, so they're using more energy during the wintertime. Well, the grid isn't ready for that because Texas normally doesn't have a massive winter storm. So that's also part of the equation here. Again, the idea of blaming wind energy for any of this is just completely absurd. Now, a little more on this. Ryan Cooper here tweeting out, root cause here, it seems, is that Texas has been skimping on maintenance and resilience upgrades, including wind de-icing gear, and its grid is mostly disconnected from the rest of the country. So this is the other issue that I want to discuss. Wind turbine reliability. Typically, wind turbines in Texas don't need to be equipped with wind de-icing gear, as not much ice in Texas until now. But ironically, wind turbines now in warmer climates need to be designed to stand up to wild weather that is occurring because of the climate crisis, the very thing that these wind turbines are existing to address. So, oddly enough, it is now necessary to actually prep or equip these wind turbines with this sort of gear. Now, this should also be obvious to anyone actually looking at all the facts, as if you are aware, wind turbines do exist in other countries, including in colder climates, like Canada. Canada has plenty of wind turbines. Canada is now home to the world's 9th largest wind generating fleet. And there are now 301 wind farms operating from coast to coast, including projects in 2 of the 3 northern territories. How do you think wind turbines can possibly function in the coldest climates in Canada without the proper gear? So the issue isn't the wind turbines. The issue is that there is gear that you can actually add to the wind turbines to prevent them from failing. And again, when it comes to Texas, still only a fraction of the actual issue when it comes to these outages. Now, a little more here from the government of Canada. Wind turbine manufacturers are increasingly recognizing the impacts of cold climate operation and are building turbines better equipped to handle winter conditions. With the installation of cold weather packages, which provide heating to turbine components such as the gearbox, yaw, and pitch motors and battery, some turbines can operate in temperatures down to minus 30 degrees Celsius, which is minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Various types of rotor blade de-icing and anti-icing mechanisms, such as heating and water-resistant coatings, are currently being employed, as well as operational strategies to limit ice accumulation. So there is already equipment that exists to deal with wind turbines that face this kind of weather. Even if wind turbines were to blame for the power failures in Texas, which again they're not, because of they're a fraction of the actual outages. But even if they were to blame, it would not be the fault of green energy or wind energy. It would be the fault of Texas not being prepared for this kind of weather. Again, showing you just how dishonest Fox News is when it comes to this conversation.